Before I call the next witness, could I deal with some things which are sometimes called housekeeping matters? First, I tender the article in the Sydney Morning Herald upon which Mr Pearson was cross-examined. I'll hand up 2 copies, and there'll be copies available for others.
23.26.
There are a number of statements which aren't in the witness statement bundle which have been served on all of the parties, and all of the parties have been invited to indicate whether the deponents are required for cross-examination. And in respect of each of the statements, there's been no notice given that any of the deponents are required. And so I propose to tender each of those statements on that basis. First is the statement of Inspector Elizabeth Cullen, made 27 February 2015.
23.27.
Next is a statement of ATN, made 24 February 2015.
23.28.
Next is the statement of ARQ and the annexures. The statement is dated 18 February 2015.
23.29.
I call Jim Mean. His statement is found at tab 15 in volume 2 of the statements bundle, and I should have referred to him as James Mean, I'm sorry.
Do you wish to take the oath or the affirmation?
The oath, thank you, Your Honour.
You raise the Bible in your right hand, please, and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God
That the evidence I shall give.
that the evidence I shall give
In this Royal Commission.
in this Royal Commission
Shall be the truth.
shall be the truth,
The whole truth.
the whole truth,
And nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Replace the Bible, please, Mr. Mean, and take a seat.
What is your name?
James Stephen Mean.
And Mr Mean, you made a statement to the Royal Commission. You did so on the 10th of February 2015.
I did.
And what you said in that statement is true?
Other than one particular clause where there's a word that needs to be deleted.
Tell me about it. Where's that?
On page 6, clause 19K. In the first line it says the headmaster is responsible for the day-to-day operations and governance. The words "and governance" should be deleted because they are the responsibility of the school council.
Thank you. Are there any other errors or clarifications?
No.
I tender that statement and all of the annexures referred to in it.
23.30.
Now, Mr Meehan, could you just describe your current position within the Uniting Church?
I am supposedly in transition to retirement. I do list the current appointments I have. Most of them are pro bono, including directorships on the Wesley Community Services Limited. I chair the trustee fund of the Uniting Church Beneficiary Fund, which is the Minister's Superannuation Fund nationally. I have other roles with Frontier Services, and I keep getting pulled back for other roles because of my corporate history with the church.
Between 2004 and 2007, you were moderator of the Synod.
That's correct.
What did that involve?
That involved, firstly, to be the chair of the councils of the church that have the authority of the Synod. That's the Synod and its standing committee. I also had the responsibility to provide prophetic, ecumenical and inspirational leadership to the church membership throughout New South Wales and the Australian Capital Territory. And I also had a primary responsibility in my position description to actually come up with a vision for the future of the church in our synod. And it's fair to say that in your long association with the church, you've held a number of different positions. I have. One of them was the role of Executive Director of the Uniting Church New South Wales Trust Association Limited. Correct. What did that involve? That involved being responsible for the staff that ran our investment banking operations. It also required me to attend all board meetings as the Executive Director. And it is the Treasury arm of the Synod's banking operations across all its life. And did that role have any oversight function in terms of the insurance operations of the church? No, not that part. And you were a member of the Knox Grammar School Council between 1994 and 2001? I was. And then you had a break and came back and were a member of the council between 2008 and 2012? Correct. During the 2 periods you were on the council, was it the case that the majority of councillors had to come from positions within the church? No. They're appointed by the church, but on the nomination of the council, of the school, and also the local presbytery. So they could come from any walk of life, but the majority of councillors would be appointed by the church. Is that how it works? They're all appointed by the church except for the ex officio role for what was then the Board of Education, and when I was Director of Schools Ministry I had that role on behalf of the successor Board uniting Ministry with Education. The other 15 were all appointed by the Synod Standing Committee of the Church. So 15 people on the council? 16 for the ex officio role. And how was it that they came to be appointed then by the church? What was the process? The process involved the school council to nominate the people it wished to go on its council. They generally followed what we would call a governance matrix. They had to have skills and experience that was relevant to the governance role that they were fulfilling. And I think you've said in the correction that you made to your statement on page 6 that the headmaster was responsible for the day-to-day operations of the school. Correct. But you deleted the words governance, and I take it you did that because the governance of the school was the function, or the fulfilment of that function was the council's. Correct. Can I just get you to see if the following statements are correct in relation to the governance issues? The Constitution of Knox Grammar School requires that the management of the school be carried out by a council of approximately 16 people. The old constitution, yes. And when did the new constitution come in? Well, I think Knox is still to get it up and approved by the church. All our other schools passed it in my time as executive, as the Director of Schools Ministry. That was one of the main changes, to delete the management function from the school council, because it hadn't been happening for a long time. Is it right that in your experience the headmaster of Knox is responsible for the general administration and daily operation of Knox? That's correct. And the headmaster is responsible for implementing decisions of the council? Where they relate to the headmaster, yes.
And the headmaster at all times, in your experience, has been answerable to the council?
Yes.
The headmaster is employed at the decision of the council?
Yes.
And the council has the power to obviously terminate the employment of the headmaster?
It does.
And the council, in your experience, exercises oversight where it considers it necessary to do so of the way in which the headmaster is performing his functions?
Yes, it does.
And there are
annual review of his performance.
And in your experience, there are monthly council meetings?
There are usually a minimum of 6, normally 10
per year.
Per year.
And in your time, and if there was any difference between the two periods in which you're on the council, please tell me, were there routinely written reports by the headmaster to the council?
They were, but they are a different extent of reporting, but yes.
What do you mean by that?
There was always a headmaster's report, and the headmaster had different agenda between the two headmasters. I actually served under 3 headmasters. Each of them had their own idiosyncrasies in the style of reporting.
And the first of those headmasters was Dr. Ian Patterson.
Correct.
And that covered the period when you were on the council, 1994 to December 1998.
No, a bit later, early. I stood down with him. Yes, sorry, that's correct.
And then in January 1999 until your stint on the council ended in 2001, that was Peter Crawley.
Correct.
And then when you came back in 2008, it was Mr. John Weeks.
Correct.
Dealing with the period in which you were on the council and Dr. Patterson was the headmaster.
Yes.
Was there ever a concern, to your knowledge, about the extent to which Dr. Patterson was consulting the council before making important decisions?
I don't have any recollection of any issues in that context, no.
Was there ever any sense, in your experience, that Dr. Patterson would make important decisions and tell the council about them later?
There were several instances of that, yes.
And do you ever recall there being discussion about that at council meetings?
With Dr. Patterson?
Well, just firstly, any discussion at any council meetings, whether Dr. Patterson was there or not?
Not that I recall.
Do you recall anyone from the council ever raising a concern about that with Dr. Patterson?
I'm not aware of it, no.
But I'll withdraw that. Had you spoken with other councillors about a concern that Dr. Patterson made decisions which were important and just told the council about them later?
I can recall having conversations at one stage where we were concerned about his reluctance to have external reviews of certain areas of their operations for legal compliance, particularly in human relations area.
When you say human relations, do you mean human resources?
Sorry, human resources, yes.
Do you recall any discussion about a concern about his reluctance, and by his I mean Dr. Patterson's, to have external reviews in relation to policies dealing with child sexual abuse or child protection policies?
I don't recall that.
Do you ever recall in the period when you're on the council between 1994 and 1998 any discussion about whether the school had any policies about child protection?
I don't recall any concerns. We certainly didn't see the policies.
Do you recall the question of whether the school actually had any policies ever being raised with Dr. Patterson?
Not that I recall.
Or being discussed during a council meeting?
Not that I recall.
Did you have it in your mind as a member of the council between 1994 and 1998 that the school should have in place policies dealing with child protection issues?
Definitely.
But just so I can understand your recollection, you don't have a recollection one way or the other about a discussion about those policies during a council meeting? Is that?
I do not recall any discussion.
And you don't recall having a discussion with anyone else from the council, whether it be in a meeting or elsewhere, about whether those sorts of policies existed?
No, we were given assurance they did exist.
But who gave you that assurance?
The headmaster.
Did he do that in a headmaster's report?
My recollection is in answer to question.
So the way it worked was that in the council meetings that occurred, the headmaster actually came along.
Headmaster attended every council meeting.
And he was there to answer any questions that the council had.
Correct.
And do you have a recollection that at a council meeting, or more than one, and tell me which it was, the issue was raised with Dr Patterson about whether there were policies dealing with child protection?
I do not recall any.
So how is it that you have a recollection of Dr Patterson saying to the council something about the topic of child protection policies?
I had it because in my synod role as the Executive Director of the then Board of Finance and Property, I had been involved in representing the church along with the chair of the council of another school in mediating with a group of victims from another school sexual abuse incident, and being very concerned that the lessons we learnt from that were being covered by our other schools.
Do you have a recollection about when it was that matter came to your attention?
I can't give you a specific time. Certainly we were interviewed between 10 and 12 young men, and they're aged 24, which is where we really came to grips with defining or recognising and defining grooming, looking at critical incident policies as to how they were handled, and we're expecting our other schools. My main recollections were to make sure that all schools had that awareness of what grooming is, because it was really unknown at that stage, and how to deal with a critical incident.
And was this at a time when Dr Patterson was the headmaster?
Yes.
And do you have a recollection of this topic being discussed at a council meeting at which Dr Patterson was present?
I can't remember the discussion, but I can recollect the questions being asked as to whether they'd adopted, whether the headmaster had adopted a similar type set of policies.
And do you have a recollection of what the headmaster, Dr Patterson, said?
I have no recollection of what he exactly said. All I can surmise is that if he hadn't, he would have said so, and that doesn't register in my memory.
Don't worry about trying to remember the exact words, but just in terms of your recollection about this council meeting where the topic was raised,
yes.
You have a recollection of someone on the council raising the question of whether Knox had a policy dealing with child protection?
My memory is it was myself that raised it.
And what's your best recollection about what was said in response to you raising that matter?
I can't remember exact words, but my sense is that he answered in the affirmative that they had.
And just dealing with your state of mind at the time that you raised the point, if the response was in the negative, that is to say, actually we don't have any policies at all dealing with child protection, I take it that's something that you would have then had in your mind to take up?
Well, I would have definitely, because I had responsibility for insurance amongst other roles in the Synod. And
do you have any recollection about taking up the issue about the absence of any child protection policies at Knox?
Well, I don't recall there being a statement to say that there weren't any.
Were you aware between 1994 and 1998 of the mandatory reporting legislation?
I don't recall that.
Do you ever recall there being a discussion about that legislation at any council meeting?
I don't recollect it.
You don't recall that matter being raised with Dr. Patterson at any meeting?
No.
And you don't recall him saying anything about it, I take it?
No.
Were you yourself aware of that legislation in that period, 1994 to 1998?
I can't recall when it came in, so I can't answer either way.
You'd agree that the mandatory reporting legislation, whenever it was that it came in, was very important legislation for schools to be aware of?
Critical. I particularly remember the 1999 introduction.
And do you recall there ever being any discussion at council level about the desirability of the school training any of the teachers about mandatory reporting obligations?
I don't recall any discussion.
Would you accept that there should have been a discussion about it at council level?
There definitely should have been.
And would you accept that the council should have pressed the headmaster confining yourself at the moment to the period 94 to 98 about whether there were or there was any training in place for teachers about mandatory reporting obligations?
Well, I'd answer in a different way. I don't recall Dr. Patterson informing the council of mandatory reporting.
Putting to one side whether Dr. Patterson informed the council about mandatory reporting, I'm just trying to understand whether you think the council should have raised with Dr. Patterson the question of whether the school had in place any training of teachers going to the question of the mandatory reporting obligations.
I'm not in a position to answer because schools were not my responsibility in my church role.
What about in your role as a member of the Knox Council?
As a member of the Knox Council, maybe I should have, but I don't recall it being made aware at that time. Certainly 99 I was aware.
In terms of governance of the school, one of the critical aspects of governing the school was to make sure that the teachers were aware of any obligations that they had to report matters of concern about child sexual abuse. Would you agree with that?
I agree.
And so, and I'm not saying to you at the moment whether the council in fact did this, but would you accept the proposition that it would have been an appropriate thing for the council to do between 1994 and 1998 to raise with Dr. Patterson whether there were any policies to train the teachers about mandatory reporting?
I would agree, but I would also add the comment that when I raised the issues of grooming and the critical incidents as a result of our experience with another school, that would have been an important reason for that to be done.
Was the mandatory reporting issue something you had in your mind when you raised that grooming point?
My concern was the protection of the students, and what I'd learnt from the other case, having to face 10 to 12 former students in a 20-hour day when we were doing the settling of the claims, and their response to, or questioned me at about 1:45 the next morning about giving a guarantee that there would never be sexual abuse again. I said I couldn't give it, but out of your experiences, we have learnt enormously. And I want to get that, make sure that was reflected through the other schools.
And is it right to say that you accepted in this period of time that it wasn't really good enough for a council to just leave it to the headmaster? The council had to do something to satisfy itself that proper steps were being taken by the headmaster to make his teachers aware of their obligations to report.
I agree.
And similarly, the council had to do something itself to be satisfied that the headmaster had in place a policy or policies dealing with child protection issues.
I agree.
May I ask you some questions about the documentary records held by Knox Grammar School? Do you recall having any meetings or other dealings with a fellow by the name of Dwayne Feely?
I remember Dwayne Feely, yes.
What position did he occupy in 2009, to the best of your recollection?
He was the Senate insurance manager for a time.
Fairly senior role?
Fairly senior role.
And as at 2009, how often were you meeting with him?
He was part of the working group that we had established, so my meetings with him were not so much face-to-face, but by email.
Were you located in the same city?
Yes.
But you did have meetings with him from time to time?
From time to time.
And what was your relationship with him like in 2009?
I didn't see any great problems with him. He was a very quiet person, so didn't say very much. So I'm not aware of any difficulties with the relationship.
You didn't have any conflict with him in that period of time that you're aware of?
Not that I'm recall.
No reason that you're aware of why he would hold a grudge against you or anything like that?
I wasn't aware he had a grudge against me.
No, I'm just asking you whether you were aware of any reason in your mind why he would.
I don't believe so.
Could tab 204 in Exhibit 23.1 be shown? It's volume 2 in the tender bundle. Just if we could scroll down. Do you see there's an email here from Rob Wannon to a number of people, including you, on the 6th of July 2009? I
do.
And that email is circulating a draft apology. Sorry, I withdraw that. A draft apology or draft apologies.
Yes.
And you then forwarded those drafts on to a number of people. It's in the middle of the page. By email at about 5:55. See that?
Can you scroll it down a bit?
You scroll up.
All right.
See your email to Stephen Webb and others.
Yes.
Just essentially forwarding on the email you'd received.
Yes.
And one of those people you sent that or copied that email to was Dwayne Feely.
Yes.
And then up the top of the page, you see Mr. Feely has sent an email to someone called Gavin Lee shortly after he received your email.
Yes.
Who was Gavin Lee?
I don't recall ever meeting Gavin Lee, but I gather he was an assistant to Dwayne Feely.
Now, I should make it plain, Mr. Mean, but just correct me if I've got this wrong. You didn't receive this email that Dwayne Feely sent to Gavin Lee. It was never forwarded on to you or blind copied to you or anything like that?
I only became aware of it very recently as preparing my witness statement for this commission.
You were asked to make a comment on what Mr. Feely had said in this email recently by the Royal Commission, correct?
Yes.
And do you see Mr. Feely says here in the second paragraph, the solicitor who drafted this is one who has been advising the school to destroy documents with Jim's assistance. You see that's what Mr. Feely says.
I can see that.
Do you have a recollection of being at any meeting where the question of destroying documents held by Knox was discussed?
I can remember several, but not with this group.
You can remember meetings where the question of destruction of documents was discussed?
Yes, but it's in a totally different and totally unrelated context.
Certainly. Firstly, who was at the meetings that you have a recollection of?
It's basically what we call the CKWK group, which really was the Church Knox working group, which had Stephen Webb, Rod Frail was there, John Weeks was there, Martin Gooding, Dunstan Berenger, who was Dwayne Feely's offsider, because Dwayne Feely wasn't around from my memory at that time. There was Lisa Burton from Kempstrang Solicitors, Wendy Blacker for us, and it was basically to look at the apologies, because we were very concerned as the church, and the school, I think, shared that concern, that we wanted to address the human factors of this whole sordid affair with all the abuse that had come to light. And that meeting, I don't recall anyone saying we should be destroying records.
But I just want to make sure I've got this right. I thought you said there was discussion, but in a different context.
In a different context, but not at that meeting.
I see. When was the meeting that you attended where there was any discussion about destruction of documents?
We have had a number of conversations over the time, we being Mr Weeks, Mr Wannon and others, because we've been concerned, and it's come out earlier in this commission hearing, about a lot of the staff and student records being what we felt were being sanitised. Somebody would actually be going through there destroying documents that were, we felt, were, from what we had heard, should have been there and weren't there. I certainly have never, nor am I aware of any solicitor in our groups who'd actually said that we should be destroying records. To me, it's abhorrent to do so. And
are you aware of anyone in any meeting you've been to who's given advice to destroy documents?
I know of no one.
The discussions that you told the Commission about a short while ago were discussions about the, if I could call it, historical destruction of documents, or concerns about that
Correct.
matter. And I take it your concerns about the historical destruction of documents were at least in part prompted by a file note that made reference to the files of 2 students having gone missing.
Sorry, I haven't. Can you
Could
recall
tab
me?
27 in volume 1 of exhibit 23.1 be shown? Do you recognise this document?
I remember seeing it earlier in this hearing.
So, but did you see
That's
it
the
before
first
then?
I've seen of it.
Can I ask you this, in terms of what prompted your concerns about historical destruction of documents, one of the things that you had done around 2009 is gone and looked at some of the school records?
I have not.
You sure about that?
I'm sure about that.
Could tab 205 in volume 2 be shown? Just scroll down to the bottom. See, there's an email from you towards the bottom to just go up. 31 July. Go back down. From you to UCAK.
Yes.
Was that the group that you mentioned a minute ago?
That's the UCAC group, yes. No, sorry, that's a different group.
Oh, that's a different group. But you, in this email over the page, if we scroll down, make reference to the school records, including, in relation to a particular matter, including notes by Dr. Patterson.
I vaguely recall it.
Had you looked at some of the school records maintained by Knox in around 2009?
The only school record that I can recall seeing was the Wilson report, which I hadn't seen before.
What was it that raised your concern about the historical destruction of documents?
It was a comment given to me that this was causing problems in trying to retrace history.
Who said that?
I can remember Mr Weeks discussing that with me on the phone. I can remember that being discussed at some of our meetings, even council meetings.
A concern from raised by Mr Weeks that it appeared as though someone within the school had been, I think the word you used, but tell me if I'm wrong, sanitising.
Yeah, it was a word that was constantly used.
Sanitising.
Sanitised.
And by that, did you understand sanitising to mean destroying relevant records?
It was destroying records to make the files look clean.
Destroying records which might implicate the school in terms of having knowledge of allegations of sexual abuse.
We can only assume that.
But that was the concern.
That was the concern.
Those are my questions.
Thank you, Mr Lloyd. Any questions of this witness?
I hope
Yes.
Your Honour, please, as Ms Eastman, I appear for you and also for the church. Your Honour, there was another statement that Mr Mean had prepared and provided to the Royal Commission, which is behind tab 16 in the statements bundle. I'm not sure if my learned friend
My apologies,
proposed to tender that document.
So, I do. It's my fault. I'll tender that statement as well.
23.31.
I want to ask you a few questions. Can I deal first with the question that you were just asked about going to look at records at the school? Was it the case that in 2009 and following, if you reviewed any records from the school, that didn't involve you personally going to review records at the school, but they might have been documents provided to you by the school?
There would be that latter category. I certainly didn't make any trip to go looking at records.
And in terms of the constant reference to the expression sanitising, was one of the concerns that you and Mr Weeks, for example, spoke about was the absence of Mr Pearson's earlier report?
I think there were a number of reports that we feared that because we couldn't find them.
And did you form a view as to what might have happened to those records or who might have been involved in sanitising the records?
Well, I had a fear that a certain person who was in a position to actually work with these files could have done it, but we didn't have the evidence to prove that he had done it.
And was that person somebody who's been mentioned to date in the Royal Commission?
It is.
Are you able to tell Her Honour and the Commissioner who that person is?
It's Adrian Nisbet in his role as the executive assistant when he was working in the file room that was mentioned earlier on. He had access. What we can't do is prove that he actually was the person who did it, but we just found it strange that there were key documents that incriminated certain people were not on the files, and also we were concerned that even this black or blue folder didn't have all the information it was alleged to have had in it to help. I think it was Mr Crawley to come into the role as head and know what had been the problems.
And had you ever had any discussion with Mr Feely about the concerns that you and others had about Mr Nisbet perhaps sanitising records?
He may have been involved in one discussion, but he never asked questions. So I don't know what his concern was.
I just want to ask you a little more about Mr Feely's involvement in matters following February 2009. And I think you've told the Commission that he was part of a working group established by the church. And the purpose of that working group was to have key personnel so that the church was able to respond to the unfolding matters at Knox.
Correct.
And you had a role on the Synod group, but you also had a role on the Knox group.
That was so, yes.
And it was the view of the church working group in late February, early March 2009 that it was important that there be an apology and an acknowledgement by both the school and the church as to what had occurred.
Definitely.
And did Mr Feely ever raise with you an anxiety or concern on his part that if the church and the school apologised or acknowledged those events, that that might prejudice the church's position with respect to the insurer?
He never expressed that view.
And do you recall having any discussion as to whether or not the school and the church making an apology separately or together might impact on the church's position with respect to the insurer?
No, our concern, it was mine as well as the church, was the human factor. We were concerned about the survivors. We didn't know who they were. We had suspicions as to who they might be, only because we knew what files the police had taken for their strike force Erica review. We were concerned to make sure that counselling services were put in place, and we saw the apologies as part of this response to the human factor. We were not looking at it from an insurance or a legal point of view. We were saying people come first, and that was the church's view, and I think the school's view from my recollection.
And at any time did Mr Feely express to you that he was worried that that approach might be prejudicial to the church's position? And I think during the period of 2009, you were on leave for a period of some 2.5 months between the end of April and June 2009.
Yes, I was.
And the email that you've been taken to, which I think is document 204, is an email in early July 2009. And you've told the Royal Commission that you've only seen that email in recent times.
That's correct.
But you would have seen in the chain of emails, and I don't know, Commissioner, if it's convenient to bring that document back up.
Certainly.
If we scroll down, the first email in the chain is from Mr Frail to Mr Wannon, a little further down. And there's no commentary in the email other than it suggests that there's some apologies or a draft document attached. Then Mr Wannon has forwarded that email on to you, among others.
Yes.
And the recipients there include Mr Weeks and Mr Oldmeadow. Who was Mr Oldmeadow and what was his role at the time?
His role at the time was the Executive Director of the Board of Education, as it was called then.
And Mr Cullen, who was he?
He was the school's Administration Business Manager.
And Mr Gooding?
Director of Students, I think it was.
And there's an email address for Ms Blacker
Yes.
immediately underneath.
Correct.
And that email is something that you recall reading on or fairly close to 5:45 p.m. on the 6th of July.
It is.
And you then forward that email on, if we can scroll up, to another group, and that includes Mr Berenger,
Yes.
Mr Webb and Mr Feely.
Yes.
And the reference to working drafts for tomorrow was a reference to what?
There was a reference to the meeting I referred to earlier on at Kem Strang, which is a meeting also with in Mr Wannon's legal firm's office. From memory, Lisa Burton, who was the person representing the school at the criminal cases, she was there as well. And that's where we actually determined who was going to be responsible for what and how we would process various things, including processing the working drafts of the apology letters.
And just pausing at this period of time, the work done on the apologies was because the expectation was that Mr Treloar and Mr Vance may plead guilty to the matters for which they were charged.
Correct.
And it was the case, was it not, that both the school and the church wanted to be in a position to make a public statement in the form of the apologies once those guilty pleas had been entered?
Definitely.
And in terms of you forwarding the working drafts on to the group of people who are identified in that email, were you seeking their assistance in terms of any comment or any suggestions as to what might be contained in these apologies?
What we were looking at here was getting general agreement to the wording of the apologies and the timing for their issue. That was a process that I followed in my role as the link between the church and the school for many of the documents that we, including press releases. I didn't have an authority to actually make unilateral decisions. I was actually the liaison point. So these people were being asked to say, do you have any problems?
And did you know at this point in time, the 6th of July, that Mr Feely was in fact on leave?
I believe that's what I'm pretty sure I recollect that, because Dunstan Berenger was his offside, and Dunstan was the person at the meeting, not Wayne. But we still, even when a person was away, would copy them in so that when they returned from leave or wherever they were, they'd still be in the loop.
And up to the 6th of July, had Mr Feely expressed any concern with you about it being unwise for the church to be making an apology at this point of time with the school or otherwise?
He did not express any concern.
And had you been aware that he was quite anxious by this stage that if there was an apology that might have an impact on the church's position?
Completely unaware.
And scrolling up to the top of the page, the email is forwarded only to Gavin Lee. I think you've told the Commission that you may know who he is. But was Mr Lee part of the Synod working group at this point in time?
No.
And had you yourself had any discussions with Mr Lee about the making of an apology?
No.
Had you had any discussions with Mr Lee about the insurance position of the church if an apology was made?
No, I don't even recall who Gavin Lee is.
And in terms of this email, do you have any knowledge at all as to what Mr Feely is referring to when he talks about political issues?
I'm not aware of any political issues. I'm not sure what he means.
Have Mr Feely ever raised political issues with you at all?
No.
Had anybody else raised political issues with you in the context of the church making an apology with the school?
No.
And I think you've been asked about any meetings that you attended with respect to destroying documents. But can I ask you this by reference to the email? Are you aware of any person advising the school to destroy documents with your assistance or otherwise?
None at all.
Have you had any involvement in destroying Knox school documents?
No way.
Has anybody ever raised this allegation with you at any point in time?
Never.
After the 6th of July, did you have any discussions with Mr Feely about the views that he appears to express in this email?
No.
Did Mr Feely at any time prior to his employment, I think ending around November 2009, confront you with this allegation that you had assisted in destroying documents?
No, he had not.
And in terms of the apology that was made between the school and the church, and Your Honour, if I could just ask the following document to be turned up. It's an annexure to Mr Weeks's statement, which is Exhibit 23.22. His statement's in tab 10 of the bundle, Annexure P, and it's the final document. The document reference is STAT 0480 002 0194. Now, if that can just be scrolled down slowly, do you recognise this document at all?
I do.
And can you tell the Commission what it is and the process that the school and the church came to issue this statement?
At the particular meeting I've referred to before, Commissioners, the meeting that was held at Kemp Strang, I went to present the church's point of view that the feeling was that we're in it together because we both have responsibility for what had happened, that it would be better to have joint apologies so that people would realise, particularly those who were impacted by this, that the school was not alone concerned about what had happened to the survivors. So we agreed that the apologies, where possible, would be signed by both the moderator at the time, Neil Reid, and the school headmaster. So that's why it's signed by those two, so that we're both expressing the same story of concern.
The Commission pleases those are the questions.
Thank you, Ms Eastman. Mr Watson?
I don't have.
No. No one else? Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mann. You're excused. Thank you for your attendance at the Royal Commission.
Yeah.
Well, there's a race.
There is a race. It may be a joint approach.
Ladies first.
Thank you, Mr Watson. Your Honour, a very serious allegation has been made with respect to Mr Meehan, but equally to Mr Weeks and to Mr Wannon in relation to the destruction of documents. It all emanates from this email from Mr Feely. The Church has sought to assist the Royal Commission to the extent that it has contact details for Mr Feely. They have been provided. We note with some concern that Mr Feely is not giving evidence in these proceedings, and it leaves the statement in somewhat of a position of in the air. It's a most unsatisfactory state of affairs given the seriousness of the allegations and the consequences both for our respective institutions and the individuals in relation to the allegation. It may be premature, but I would certainly be making the submission on behalf of Mr Meehan and the Church that there could be no possible finding that he was involved in the destruction of any documents on the present state of the evidence. And we express our concerns that the issue's been raised without Mr Feely giving any evidence. Your Honour, please.
Perhaps I'll just hear from Mr Lloyd with respect to Mr Feely.
Sorry. Oh, yes, of course. My application is almost identical.
All
It's
right.
in slightly different terms.
All right, I'll give you the opportunity to say that, but let me just hear from Mr Lloyd first, Mr Watson, with respect to Mr Feely.
Yes, Your Honour. Mr Feely's overseas. It wasn't possible to summon him to give evidence. He's been spoken to, but we couldn't issue a summons to him.
And when you say he's been spoken to, Mr Lloyd...
on the telephone.
Yes.
But, and attempts were made to secure his attendance by inviting him to come
To voluntarily participate.
along, but it's not possible to compel him. It was not possible to compel him to give evidence.
And he wasn't prepared to voluntarily participate? Is that an accurate description of his position?
Yes.
I have a very similar application to my little friend Ms Eastman, but could I just express it just ever so slightly differently? We acknowledge that they're serious allegations, but I'm not suggesting the Commission is out of line in investigating those matters. Obviously, with an email like that, it was important to question Mr Wannon and to question Mr Meehan because, on its face, the matter was terribly serious.
Yes.
But that's now being done, and what I'm going to do is now ask Council Assisting whether, so Mr Wannon can go about his affairs with his head held high, same with Mr Meehan, whether Council Assisting would acknowledge that the evidence cannot support a conclusion that Mr Wannon, or for that matter Mr Meehan, engaged in the destruction of documents.
I am more than prepared, in light of the evidence, to say that in light of the fact that Mr Wannon and Mr Meehan have denied on their oaths being involved in the destruction of documents as alleged by Mr Feely, and in light of there being no evidence of which I am aware in support of the allegation made by Mr Feely in his email, it would not be my intention to be saying in submissions that there's an available finding that they were involved in giving advice to the school to destroy documents, if that's of any assistance to Mr Watson and Ms Eastman.
Close. If that's the best I can do, I'll take it.
Thank you. Yes, Mr Lloyd.
I call AST. Copies. AST's statement is not in the witness bundle, and just while he's coming up, I should hand.
Thank you. Just wait, just bear with us for a moment. Can you repeat after me, please? I do solemnly, sincerely and truly, declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you. You take a seat right where you are.
You understand that you've been given the pseudonym AST for the purpose of giving your evidence?
Right, yes.
And that's how you'll be referred to in the course of giving your evidence? And that's your preference?
Yes.
You made a statement to the Royal Commission, and you did that on the 27th of February 2015?
Yes.
And what you said in that statement is true?
Yes. There was one clarification to the first line of paragraph 11.
See, what's that clarification?
It was about not being investigated by the police after the Balaclava incident, but I was referring then at the time, back in 1988, not 2009 when I gave my police statement.
We shouldn't take paragraph 11 to mean that you have never at any time been interviewed by the police about the Balaclava incident?
That's right, I was purely referring to 1988.
And the reason that we shouldn't take it that way is in 2009 you were interviewed by the police about that incident?
Correct.
There's one additional matter that you want to raise that's not in your statement, but what I might do, Mr AST, is invite you to read the statement and then ask you about that additional matter at the end. So I invite you to read your statement.
Do you have a hard copy of it there with you?
No, I don't.
Would you prefer a hard copy, or are you content to read from the screen?
This should be okay, thank you, Your Honour.
I think Mr Lloyd's intention is for you to read that out loud.
Sorry, if you could read the statement out loud.
Certainly. My full name is AST. I'm 40 years old. I grew up in Nyngan, New South Wales with my parents and younger brother and sister. I commenced my schooling at Nyngan Public School. In 1986, at the age of 12, I started at Knox Grammar School in Year 6 in the prep school. I was a boarding student due to the fact that my family lived in Nyngan. I remained a boarding student at Knox until I completed my high school certificate in 1992. In 1988, I was in Year 8 at Knox. I was residing in McNeill boarding house. I don't recall the time of the year. The housemaster in McNeill House was Tim Hawkes. Christopher Fotis was one of the resident masters who also lived in McNeill House. One night, all of the boys were getting ready for bed. While we were brushing our teeth, Fotis approached ARN and said words to the effect, "I've got a surprise for you tonight, ARN." Nothing further was said and the boys went to bed. I had no idea what was meant by this comment. On that particular night, ARN and another boy, ARA, had arranged to swap beds for the night. None of the masters would have known this. In the early hours of the morning, I was awoken when ARN yelled out, "Some faggots got my balls." Someone then switched on the lights. I saw a male person wearing a balaclava run out the door. Me and some of the other boys chased him out of the boarding house and a short distance up the Pacific Highway, but we didn't catch him. None of the masters had arisen at this time. When I returned to the boarding house, I was told by someone who I can't recall who, that the man had first gone to ARN's bed where ARA was sleeping and touched ARA on the bottom, then gone to ARA's bed where ARN was sleeping, lifted the sheets and fondled his genitals. I believe, given the build and height of the man in the balaclava, that it was Christopher Fotis who had sexually assaulted ARN. I don't recall the Masters in McNeill House conducting a search of the boarding house that night, and I don't recall an assembly of the boys downstairs or being spoken to by Hawks. The next thing I remember about the incident was a day or two later when the headmaster of Knox, Ian Patterson, called a house meeting. Patterson had never done this before. Patterson spoke about general administrative and housekeeping matters until right at the end of the meeting when he mentioned that Fotis had left the school for family reasons. I recall that Patterson also told us that the person responsible was a mentally ill old boy of Knox and that the school was taking care of things. I don't recall Patterson saying that the police had arrested anyone. I was never interviewed by the police about the incident, and I'm not aware of the other boys being interviewed by police. I was never spoken to by Ian Patterson or by Stuart Pearson, the General Duties Master, about the incident either. Following the incident, I was not made aware of any changes to the security procedures at the boarding house. My parents were never informed by the school of the incident. I told my mother about the incident shortly after it occurred. I believe she then rang the school and asked about it, but was not given any information about what had occurred or what was being done about it. She was told that everything was fine and there was no problem.
Mr. AST, that in paragraph 5 you say that the incident involving ARN and ARA occurred in 1988.
That's correct.
You're absolutely sure that that was the year?
I'm positive because there were only 2 incidents that occurred to me when I was in McNeill, and one happened in 1988 when I was in the Year 8 boarding section, and the other one when I was in Year 9, and they are at the opposite ends of McNeill House, which is why I remember clearly where I was at the time of each incident.
And so remembering the incident which occurred in Year 9, that allows you to reference when this balaclava incident was. Is that right?
Well, that and the fact that I can clearly remember which dorm I was in at the time, thereby remembering which year I was in.
What was the incident that occurred when you were in Year 9?
One night, another boy and myself were called out for talking after lights out, and the usual procedure was you were sent down to Dr. Hawkes's office door, and you'd have to tap on the door and wait for him to open the door, and then you'd go in and he'd ask you to remove your pants and then bend over the table and he would cane you. But the reason I remember this night so vividly was the gentleman in front of me who was sent with me was caned first. He had 2 or 3 strikes of the cane and then the cane broke. And that was his last cane, so he then got a pull cue and caned me with that. And it broke on the first strike.
And just to clarify, the taking off of your pants, is that including your underpants?
Yes.
Those are my questions. This witness, I should tender the witness statement.
23.32. Anyone else? No. Nothing further, Mr. Lloyd, for AST. No. Thank you.
Madam Commissioner, I apologise. Could I just ask one question?
Yes, you can.
My name is Lee Johnson, for Scott Ashton, who may or may not know. Were you ever aware of Mr. Pearson getting boys to take down their pants and be caned by him?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
It seemed a bit unfair, given Mr. Pearson was here for 2.5 hours, not to ask him, but
It was
the answer's given.
recent instructions. Right. Thank you anyway.
Thank you, Mr AST. Thank you for your attendance, and you're otherwise excused.
Just pardon me. I call Perry. Just hand up copies of her statement to Your Honour and Commissioner.
Yes.
Being circulated. Your Honour, there's a leave application, but we'll perhaps deal with it after Ms Perry's sworn.
Ms Perry, do you wish to take the oath or the affirmation?
Don't know the difference.
So the affirmation is giving a solemn promise to the Commission to tell the truth without the use of the Bible. The oath is giving that same solemn promise
Affirmation
using
is
the
more my
Bible.
style.
Thank you. Could you repeat after me, please? I do solemnly,
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
in this Royal Commission
in this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Just take a seat right where you are, Paul.
My name's Ainsworth. I seek leave to appear for this purpose.
No objection
Oh,
to
no
that.
objection.
No. Thanks, Mr Ainsworth, and I'll accept your application and grant that leave.
Your name is Lucy Perry,
That's right.
and you made a statement to the Royal Commission, and you did that on the 19th of February 2015.
Correct.
What you say in this statement is true.
Yes.
I tender that statement.
23.33.
Ms Perry, I invite you to read your statement, please.
This statement made by me accurately sets out the evidence that I am prepared to give to the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. The statement is true and correct to the best of my knowledge and belief. My full name is Lucy Perry. I was born in 1973. I am 41 years old. I was born in South Africa, following which my parents and 3 older siblings moved first to England, then to Sydney in 1981. Perry is my married name. My maiden name is Schaffler. I started school at Wahroonga Public School, which is known as the Bush School. In 1984, I moved to Turramurra Public School, where I completed Year 5 and Year 6. I completed my high school years at Roseville College, an Anglican girls' school on the North Shore of Sydney. In 1989, I was in Year 10 at Roseville. I heard that Knox Grammar School were putting on a performance of Guys and Dolls, a musical I had recently been involved in at Roseville. Knox had invited girls from Pymble Ladies College and Abbotsleigh Girls School to audition for the female roles in the musical. Roseville did not receive an invitation. Some other girls from Roseville and I decided that we would go along to the Knox audition for the show, even though we weren't invited. 3 of us were selected for parts in the show. I would estimate that all up there were about 100 students involved in the production. There were 2 main teachers from Knox involved in the musical. One of the teachers, I don't recall his name, was in charge of the music, while Dr Patterson, the headmaster of Knox, was responsible for the acting and production side. I believe Dr Patterson was present at every rehearsal.
Rehearsals for the musical were initially twice a week for 3 or 4 months. All the rehearsals took place in the old hall at Knox. As the performance dates grew nearer, rehearsals were also conducted all day Saturday as well. I was cast in the main ensemble, and all of the parts I was involved in were groups of students. On one occasion I was backstage talking with some of the boys when Patterson appeared, pointed at me and one of the boys and said, "You and you're out." I believe Patterson was kicking me out of the show, so I left the school. Despite being told to leave, I returned to Knox and participated in the next rehearsal. Patterson was present and recognised me. I was the only girl in the show with short hair. Patterson said, "It appears that there are some people here today who I sent home last time. Let's hope they behave from now on." I took this to mean that I was allowed back in the show. At one of the full dress rehearsals, we were rehearsing a scene which is set in a strip club. In this particular scene, all of the girls involved were dressed in costumes including feather boas and full-length wraparound skirts over a black leotard and fishnet stockings. We were to form 2 lines and then walk out onto the stage with our arms across our chests in a very sultry manner. I did my best to perform to what I thought was expected, while the rest of the girls just ambled out on stage. Patterson stopped the rehearsal and singled me out. He asked me to show the girls how I walked out, as it was exactly how he wanted all of us to do it. I re-performed my sultry walk. Patterson was standing right next to where I was supposed to stop. I showed everyone my entrance, and all of the girls were returning to practice the scene again. As I turned away from Patterson to walk to the back of the stage, he placed his hand on my backside. I would describe it as between a pat and a grope. He then slid his hand right down to cup my buttocks, and I felt him touch my genitals outside of my clothing. I turned around and saw Patterson had what I would describe as a creepy look of satisfaction on his face. At the time, the scene we were rehearsing only involved girls, so all the boys were sitting on the floor right in front of the stage. The assault occurred in plain view. I was humiliated in front of the boys, and I heard the boys cheering. I heard Patterson chuckling. I quickly walked off behind the stage. I didn't say anything to Patterson after the event. I really wanted to be part of the performance, and I knew if I said anything to any of the teachers, I would be kicked out of the show by Patterson. I also did not tell my parents. My parents are the sort of people that when something goes wrong, they believe it's your own fault. I probably spoke with some of my friends about what a creep Patterson was, but I'm not sure I told them what happened. I was disgusted with Patterson's behaviour and thought that he was demonstrating to the Knox boys that it is perfectly acceptable, even admirable, to be disrespectful to girls, and was promoting a misogynistic attitude at the school. To access the girls' change room in the school hall, girls had to walk through the boys' change room. When doing this, some of the boys were at times rude and nasty, making comments, ridiculing and teasing the girls. I thought to myself, no wonder they are like that. Look at how the headmaster behaves. I didn't think too much more about the incident. I wasn't traumatised by the experience. I don't believe it has impacted negatively on my life. I did not report the incident to police at the time because I wasn't interested in pressing charges against Patterson. In 2009, I saw media coverage relating to the arrest and charging of teachers at Knox for child sexual abuse. I decided to report Patterson's assault on me to police. I didn't report it so that Patterson would be charged, but I wanted to let police know that I was happy to provide a statement if it was going to be useful to demonstrate the culture of disrespect engendered at the school and to highlight the environment and attitudes fostered by the headmaster. On the 9th of March 2009, I reported the matter to Hornsby Police. I heard nothing further from the police and was not asked to provide a statement.
Thank you. Just 3 things, Ms Perry. I forgot to ask you, what's your present occupation?
I'm a Chief Executive Officer
of
a charity called Hamlin Fistula Ethiopia, Australia Limited.
In paragraph 11 of your statement, you make reference to the boys were sitting on the floor right in front of the stage. Mm-hmm. Do you remember approximately how many of them?
I don't recall, but I do recall the absolute roar that they made when they saw the assault. So it may have been the entire cast of boys, it may have been part of the cast. So it could be 40 boys, 80 boys. It was a big enough gang to make quite a roar.
Can I show you this document? I'll at the same time hand up copies for your Honourable Commissioner. Do you recognise the document that I've just handed to you?
Yes, it was the program for the musical.
So it's a program for Guys and Dolls in the year in which you were in that production. And I'm not sure whether it can be shown on the screen, but on the front page, it's got down the bottom, Knox Grammar School presents, correct?
Correct.
And over the page records Knox Grammar School presents Guys and Dolls, correct?
That's right.
And is it the case that over on that second page, if we can scroll down to that on the screen, sorry, the page headed Knox Grammar School, that the producer is recorded as being Dr. Ian Patterson?
Correct.
And if we could go over to the next page, I'll withdraw that. It's the final page of the document. On the left of the final page, on the left are the characters, and there, to your recollection, the characters who had the main roles in the musical.
Principals, yes.
And the chorus records the other people in the production.
That's right.
And if you look on the far right-hand side, about halfway down that column, starting with Andrew Mears, about halfway down the page, there's recorded Lucy Schaffler.
That's right, that's my maiden name.
And that is you.
Correct.
Do Commissioners may just ask Mr Lloyd to consider seeking an urgent suppression order of the names of the students, apart from the present witness?
Just pardon me. We'll certainly consider it, but I can't presently advised understand what the reason for a suppression order would be. There's no suggestion that anyone's made that any of the people listed have suffered any sexual abuse. Or
It's actually,
concern, Mr Watson.
the concern is more this, that it's suggested that a large number of boys responded in a particular way, and
Concern that may cause inquiries to be made,
yes,
approaches to be made generally.
It's only that.
Well,
I want to make it clear, I've got no instructions whatsoever to contest that these events occurred.
Yeah.
It's not for that reason, it's just actually just as a precaution.
Yes.
I don't appear for these lads, but
perhaps, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt Mr Watson, but perhaps the safest course, Your Honour, would be to make a suppression order now and then for the matter to be reconsidered as to whether it's continued.
A do not publish order with respect to the document that hasn't yet been tendered and
yes,
is going to be tendered, that it contains the program for the Knox Grammar School production of Guys and Dolls.
Yes, and it might be just as well, Your Honour, for the non-publication order to extend to the entire document at the moment.
Yes.
Rather than just the last page.
Yes.
perhaps it should be removed from the screen in that event. Thank you.
I tender that document.
23.34.
Those are my questions for this witness.
Anyone at the front bar table with any questions of Ms Perry? Mr Harrowell.
Thank you. Ms Perry, my name's Harrowell. I appear for Dr Patterson. I wonder if the witness could be shown the document at tab 315 in the tender bundle. And if we could scroll down, I think it's the fourth page as well, eighth page, fourth page, is it? Fourth page, if we keep scrolling down. Yes, that's. Are you able to see that, Ms. Perry?
Yes.
That, would you like to just read the text there?
You'd like me to read it?
No, just give you an opportunity.
Just read it to yourself.
I understand.
Yeah.
So where do these words come from? They come from my original police statement?
I don't think you've actually made a statement, have you?
Not in official police terms.
No.
There's just inaccuracies here, if
Yes.
that matters.
If I could just explain that document, you probably haven't seen that document before.
No, it's the first time I've seen it.
That document is produced by New South Wales Police. That's their record
Okay.
of the incident as reported to them.
Okay. It didn't happen backstage, so that may be an error on the police officer's part.
Or could it be your error?
No, I doubt it.
So you're convinced that this...
I know exactly where the assault happened, and it wasn't backstage.
So you're convinced that this happened on stage in full view of a number of people, including a number of Knox boys?
Yes, I'm convinced because that's what happened.
Yes. And aside from the Knox boys, was anyone else there? Were their parents there, for instance?
Not that I recall. There may have been someone there playing the piano, but I don't recall who that was or where they were in relation to where I was standing on the stage.
So you say, your evidence is that Dr. Patterson engaged in the conduct you put in your statement in full view, full public view, if I could put it that way.
That's right. I had to assume that the audience of boys had seen it because of their reaction. They roared with approval.
That didn't happen slightly earlier when the chorus came onto the stage?
No.
You sure about that?
Absolutely.
Is there anyone else who corroborates your story that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of.
Nobody?
No.
What about your friends who were performing with you?
It was my bottom that was being touched, not my friends. So the assault happened to me, and they wouldn't have seen it. They were towards the back of the stage.
So you were at the front of the stage?
That's right.
So they were behind you?
There were 2 rows of girls that had to walk on stage and meet in the middle, and I was at the front of a row of those girls. So when I did that properly, Dr. Patterson asked me to do it again, and the girls filed towards the back of the stage to watch me do that. So I turned around to head back to backstage where we could start again. So my bottom was facing the audience. That audience was a bunch of boys sitting on the floor in the hall.
Oh, I see. So Dr. Patterson was between you and the front of the stage and the other girls?
He was next to me, yes.
Next to you, as you say. See, I would suggest to you, Ms. Perry, that the events you've described here didn't happen at all, and that if there was any contact with anyone on that stage, it would only be for the purpose of putting them in their position on the stage.
Well, I would suggest to you, Mr. Harrowell, that positioning girls by their bottom would not be the best way to do that.
I'm not suggesting that to you either, Ms. Perry. What I'm suggesting to you, and what I'm putting to you, is that Dr. Patterson never touched you as you suggested, and if he did anything, it was simply trying to direct you as he would direct other cast members.
I understand that, but you are paid to suggest that he didn't do that.
Ms. Perry, what you are putting against Dr. Patterson is a very serious matter.
It is, I agree. I don't do this for fun.
No, nor do I, with respect. This is a very serious matter. There is no evidence from anybody else who witnessed this incident put before this Royal Commission. None whatsoever. And yet there was supposed to be a large number of people there.
I object to this. Is that a question or is it just a general summary for you?
Well, I'd suggest to you, if it caused the reaction, which you suggest it does, that would be remembered by more people than yourself.
I suggest to you that it happened to me, and that in neuroscience, that very negative experiences are remembered long before positive ones. And that was a very negative experience for me, and I'll never forget it. I was 15 years old and an old man was touching me where he shouldn't. I will never forget that. But no one else on that cast was touched by him that way, as far as I know, so I wouldn't expect them to remember it. Certainly I wouldn't remember it if it happened to someone else at any old rehearsal.
Never saw it happen to anybody else at any rehearsal?
I don't recall seeing anyone else touched inappropriately by Dr. Patterson.
And this event occurred in 1989, and as I understand, the trigger for reporting it was the public knowledge of the arrest of a number of male teachers at Knox. Is that correct?
That's right. I actually had an employee at the time who was sitting at the desk next to me. Her son was in Trelaw's class the day he was arrested. She received an email from Knox, and I've never seen someone read an email and cry so immediately into her keyboard as I did that staff member. So it was acutely brought to my attention by a staff member whose young son was in Trelaw's class the day he was arrested. Then it was all over the news, and I only brought it to the attention of the police to assist.
Was Mr. Trelaw part of the production?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
So how would it assist in relation to Mr. Trelaw?
I had to assume that police were investigating Knox in general.
I see.
And Dr. Patterson was the headmaster for a long time.
No further questions.
Anyone else from the back bar table? Any re-examination, Mr. Lloyd?
Just one question, Your Honour. Ms Perry, in answer to a question that Mr Harrowell asked you, you said something to this effect, that you weren't doing this for fun. Why have you come forward now?
I can't think of a Royal Commission I'd rather assist more than one that is looking into the institutional responses to child sexual abuse. I just wanted to be able to assist the Royal Commission with details about an incident that, though that incident hasn't had a negative impact on my life, it may help the Royal Commission to build a to build a story for what the culture was like at Knox.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Ms Perry. Thank you for your attendance, and you're otherwise excused.
You're welcome.
Sorry, I didn't ask you, Mr Ainsworth. I assumed you would get to your feet if there was anything you wanted to put.
Sorry, I didn't need to then, or I do now, pardon me, but no, there's nothing I needed to do after that.
All right, and I'll otherwise excuse you too if you wish to be excused from the bar table. Thank you.
Speak to the client.
There's an application by Mr Downing for leave in respect of Ms Cook.
Thank you. If I could...
Just whilst your client's... I might just swear your client in and then I'll take your application. Now, Ms Cook, do you wish to take the oath or the affirmation?
I'll take the oath, thank you.
All right. So if you raise the Bible in your right hand, please. And repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
in this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and
nothing but the truth.
nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Ms Cook. If you replace the Bible and take a seat, please. Now, Mr.
Thank you.
Downing.
My name's Downing. I seek Your Honour's leave to appear in the interests of Ms Cook.
No objection to that application,
No,
Mr.
Your Honour,
Lloyd.
no objection.
I'll accept the oral application and grant leave.
Thank you.
What is your name?
My name is Anne Cook.
What is your occupation?
I'm retired.
And when you were in work, what was your occupation?
I worked as a school counsellor.
And in the early 1990s, were you employed as a school counsellor at Knox Grammar School?
Yes, I was.
When did you start your employment there?
I started my employment in 1977 part-time as a learning support teacher.
And when did you finish at Knox?
2000, February 2000.
And for how long were you employed as a school counsellor?
I haven't got the records. It will be on the school record as to the date. It's in the 90s.
Do you remember approximately how many years you were a school counsellor for?
It's inside that 10 years.
In order to answer, I'll withdraw that. I'll ask you a different question first. Do you remember an external counsellor by the name of David Harding?
Yes, I do indeed.
He was someone to whom students were referred or sent from time to time?
Yes.
A psychologist who operated externally and had rooms fairly close to the school?
Yes.
And did you have regular dealings with him in the early 1990s?
Through the 1990s, yes.
And in general terms, was the nature of those dealings that you would be aware that a student might have been referred to him?
Yes.
And you would speak to him from time to time about how that student was going with their therapy provided by Mr. Harding?
We would compare notes about our therapies where I saw a student that was then referred to him or had he seen, and otherwise it would be just about the therapies.
Because often the students that were sent to him were students who you had seen?
Sometimes, not always. I wasn't even aware of some that were sent to him.
But either way, at least some of the time, he was seeing students about whom you had some concern in respect of their welfare.
Yes, it might have been to do with their approach to education.
Well, one of the things that you were concerned with in your role as school counsellor obviously was the welfare of the boys who came to see you from time to time.
So the issue would be anxiety.
Sure. Whatever the issue they saw you about, you were concerned to try and help them with it.
Yes.
And to the extent that those boys were sent to Mr. Harding, your concern wouldn't go away. You'd discuss their welfare and their therapy with him from time to time.
If he was continuing to see them.
Did you have an opinion about David Harding? Was he a good therapist?
Yes.
And presumably that's why the school continued to send boys to him, because the belief was that he could help them.
Yes.
You might need to consult the pseudonym list in the witness box. If you look down, there should be a list of acronyms and names next to them, or initials and names.
Yes.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Do you ever recall discussing with Mr. Harding therapy that was being given to a student ATQ, for example?
I recognise the name, but I don't recall discussing anything with David Harding about him.
In the early 1990s, do you have any recollection of David Harding telephoning you and saying to you that a Knox student had disclosed to David Harding that he had woken up naked in Adrian Nisbet's shower?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Certainly. In the early 1990s, do you have any recollection of David Harding telephoning you and saying to you that a Knox student had disclosed to David Harding that he'd woken up naked in Adrian Nisbet's shower?
No, I don't.
Is it the case that if David Harding had telephoned you and relayed that information to you, it's likely that that would be something that you would remember?
Yes, indeed.
Because you would have regarded that as a significant matter to come to your attention in your capacity as a school counsellor?
Yes, in the length of time the name might escape me, but not the incident.
Certainly if David Harding had telephoned you and told you that a student had woken up naked in Adrian Nisbet's shower, is the effect of your evidence that that's something that you'd remember, even if you didn't remember who the particular student was?
Yes, I would remember the information.
You're absolutely certain that he didn't call you up and tell you about that?
No, I'm not.
Is it the case that he might have done that?
I'm not prepared to say because it's a long time ago and I don't remember.
Do you have any recollection of ever raising with Dr. Patterson an account about a student waking up naked in Adrian Nisbet's shower, however it came to pass that you were given that information?
No.
No recollection of ever discussing with Dr. Patterson an event of that nature?
No.
No recollection of discussing with any student an event where they woke up naked in Adrian Nisbet's shower?
The student being the student that woke up?
Well, any recollection of a student, you being told that a student had woken up naked in Adrian Nisbet's shower?
No.
And you don't recall being told that by a student?
No.
You don't recall being told that by David Harding?
No.
And you don't recall discussing that with Dr. Ian Patterson?
No.
Just going back to the state of your recollection about a discussion with David Harding about information that I put to you about a student waking up naked in Adrian Nisbet's shower, I just want to understand the position. Is it the case that you do not presently have a recollection about being told that by David Harding?
Yes, that's right.
But do you accept that it's possible that he may have told you that, but you might have forgotten it?
No, I don't think so. The significance of the incident would suggest that I wouldn't forget something like that.
Are you aware that David Harding's given evidence that he told you that?
Yes, I am.
And what's your response to David Harding's assertion that that's what he told you?
I can only give you my response to as I recall the information.
You deny it?
Yes.
Do you accept that if David Harding had given you information of that nature, that it would have been incumbent upon you to make a report about it to Knox?
Do I accept that?
Do you accept that if you had that information,
yes,
that it would have been incumbent upon you to make a report to Knox?
Yes.
Okay. Was there a culture of which you were aware in the time that you were a counsellor about at Knox about whether it was encouraged to report incidents to docs?
That it was encouraged to report. Could you repeat that bit?
Let me ask you a different question. Do you recall there being any training given to you about your mandatory reporting obligations?
No.
Did you know in the early 1990s about any obligations that you had to report matters to docs?
Yes, as a psychologist, you know.
And what was your understanding of those obligations in the early 1990s?
Not very good, I guess.
And did you ever have any discussion with Dr. Patterson about whether, as a counsellor, it was necessary for you from time to time to report matters to docs?
No.
Do you ever remember going to any meetings where mandatory reporting was discussed?
No.
Remember any seminars or any form of advice or tuition at all from the school about mandatory reporting?
No.
Did Dr. Patterson ever tell you that you should not report a particular matter to docs?
No.
Or to the police?
No.
Did you ever have any discussion with Dr. Patterson about the topic of reporting any incident of any description to the police or docs?
No.
Do you remember ever having a concern in your own mind about whether something you were told was something that needed to be reported to docs or the police?
No.
Not a single instance.
I would have sought advice.
So does that mean not a single instance in your years as a counsellor at Knox did you wonder whether it was necessary for you to make a report of a matter because it involved a threat to the welfare of a student in the context of child sexual abuse?
No. I had Dr. Patterson's phone number and an agreement that if I was concerned about an issue regarding a student, that I would phone him. And I never did. It's not necessary.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Do you recall any student who you ever saw telling you that they'd been inappropriately touched by any teacher?
No.
That they'd been in a situation which made them feel uncomfortable?
I can't recall any.
Do you recall approximately how many students in a given week at a time when you were a counsellor you would see?
It varied according to what events were in a year for a student. Under a pressure exams, they would have come more.
May I ask you this question? Have you been following the evidence that has been given by a number of former students of Knox Grammar School during the course of this hearing?
No, I haven't.
You're aware, and I'll put this in general terms, that there are a significant number of former students of Knox who were the subject of child sexual abuse in the period of time when they were there. Are you aware of that?
Was I aware?
No, are you aware now?
I'm aware because I read the opening address, but that's all I've seen.
Do you have a response to what might appear to be a discord between the experience and evidence of a number of former students and your experience, which I understand, as I understand your evidence to this commission, is that on no occasion can you recall a single student raising any instance of feeling uncomfortable or being inappropriately touched by a teacher?
I object to that question. I mean, the witness can give evidence about what she can recall, what her recollections are of events at the time and things that were reported to her, but to ask her to give a response about a discord in evidence is really asking her to speculate about something.
No, I won't press the question. Those are my questions for this.
Now, anyone at the front by table? Mr Skinner, no?
Just this, if I may, relevant to this question, Ms Cook, My name is Skinner and I act for ATQ. If you look at the pseudonym list, do you remember him at all?
I think I do, actually.
In relation to the questions Council Assisting has asked you about whether or not you recall the psychologist Dr. Harding speaking to you about a boy who'd apparently woken up naked in Adrian Nisbet's shower, my client given evidence before this commission that he was told by Dr. Harding of that incident, and Dr. Harding told him that the boy hung himself. Does that accord with anything you can remember at all?
No, not at all.
I won't put anything further because those are the only things that my client has given evidence about, but if... I withdraw that, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thanks, Mr Skinner. Anyone else? Any questions of this witness? No? Oh, no. No re-examination. Ms Cook, can you just assist us to understand, were you the only counsellor at Knox during the period that you were a counsellor at the school, or were there other counsellors?
No, there was another counsellor who became the counsellor there, Barry Griffin.
Who worked simultaneously with you?
Yes, I don't remember how long it was for, but I think it was in the last couple of years before, like 1989, 99. I'm not sure. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for your attendance at the Royal Commission. You're otherwise excused. Thank you. As are you. You are excused. Thank you.
Your Honour and Commissioner, that brings us to Dr. Patterson. I won't finish with him today. I'm content, if it's convenient, to call Dr. Patterson now and we can make use of the 11 minutes, or we could call him in the morning, whatever is your preference.
Do you have a particular view, Mr Harrowell? Would you prefer to start now or wait till the morning?
I would ask that if it starts tomorrow, Your Honour. I think
that's
10 minutes.
Yeah, I'm quite content to do that as a matter of fairness to your client, Mr Harrowell. So we'll adjourn now and commence with Dr Patterson at 10 tomorrow.
Thank you.
As a matter of fairness to your client, Mr Harrowell. So we'll adjourn now and commence with